All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here in the final Go to Training of the month. Like I said, my name is John Morton. I am one of the instructors for Psychology of Play. If you're in one of my sections, hey, hello. This is me in real time. I'm glad everybody's here. Has everyone been enjoying the class so far? Having a good time? Yes. All right. Wonderful. I really hope I hope everything's been fun for you all and been beneficial. I think that's one of the things that I really enjoy about our class is that we have stuff and it's helpful and it's informative, but really more than anything else, I think it's some pretty useful tools. And I think everyone may have known some of these things. Some of it might be brand new, and some of it might be things you said, that seems like a good idea, and I'm sure it's helpful. A lot of times without the accountability of a class and instructor saying, hey, do this every week. It's easy to just say, oh, well, that seems like a good idea, but I don't have time for it. I can't make that a priority, or I can't make that a habit. That's awesome, Rebecca. I'm glad you're able to share with your family. It's nice because we have the opportunity here to say, hey, you know what? We're going to work on, having a weekly plan. We're going to set out specific goals. If you're in my section, one of my students, I want to know what my students are doing, kind of week to week, and say, hey, get specific with things. Your goal setting, especially. It's like if I set a specific goal for a day and I'm like, this day I'm going to do this, that thing tends to get done versus generic goals where, oh, well, I'd like to work more on this broad field. So I think that there's some stuff when it's like, oh, wow, when put into practice, this is pretty useful. It's informative. It helps out a lot. I like that everyone gets the opportunity to sit and do that and make a practice out of it. It's the whole, if you do the same thing for 21 days, that's how habits are formed. And we go the extra week and we, we do it for 28 days. So hopefully some of the habits are formed and ingrained by the time we reach the end of the class. So today we're going to talk about, I can read the things. I'm trying to think about it in terms of how it makes sense. Basically how our mind works. Sometimes for us and sometimes against us, but kind of I don't want to say head games, but like a lot of the way that how our brain works, how we kind of may have been conditioned to think and to relate to things, and practices that we can engage in to kind of identify where some of our thought processes aren't helping us. How can they be more helpful? How can they help us get through life more efficiently, be more productive, feel more positive, and move forward in an empowered state? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So we open with the question, can you control your emotion? And feel free, jump in. If you want to talk, you can raise your hand, hit the hand button, and I can unmute you and call on people if you have kind of an in-depth conversation you want to have. But yeah, what do you think about this? Can we control our emotions? We have no's, we have yeses. Does anyone want to elaborate and talk a little bit more about that? I'm curious. You can direct him. Depends on the situation, but not control. It depends, really. Okay, so everyone kind of sounds like it depends. What do we think it depends on? Control how you act. Okay, yeah, absolutely. But maybe not how you feel. Definitely, that's yeah. The situation, your personality. All right. Your mindset. Yeah, absolutely. I think that there are, that's absolutely the case. Some of it, yeah, yes and no is the answer. That's really what it comes down to. The answer is yes and no. Things happen, and sometimes we have more control and sometimes we have less control. I think that it's important to acknowledge what we're feeling and feel it. And that's a big part of mindfulness, which is one of the things that we talk about today. When we, it seems like, I think if anyone's ever, had this experience, maybe you're watching a movie or you're reading a book or something, and, there's, say it's a sad story, and you try to fight that. You say, I don't want to feel sad, or I don't want to cry, or whatever it is. It's harder when we fight it. We fight it and we say, oh, I don't want to feel this way, or this is awful. Instead of just saying like, wow, yeah, that's a real, just acknowledge and say, yeah, wow, that's really sad. This is what's happening. And just going along with it, just saying, hey, this is it's reasonable to feel sad in, given these settings. So I think that's like a nice jumping off point is controlling our emotions or attempting not to feel them is difficult and probably not. It tends, we think, oh, if I can't control my emotions, then they'll control me. And I think it's just the opposite is true. I think that when we try to control our emotions, we don't get to walk fully through them. We don't get to experience them. And it's a lot more likely that they'll come out in ways that we didn't expect or anticipate them coming out. So that's, maybe not a real clear answer, but it's kind of my perspective on that. We definitely have control over the way that we react to our emotions, though. Sometimes, I'm upset, I get mad, but right from there, I say, hey, what's the next step? Am I going to let this control, the way that I act? Am I going to act based on this? Or am I going to say, hey, I feel this way and I don't like it. And, where can I go from here? Ellis and Siegelman are kind of two theorists who go through and they talk about the anatomy of an emotion, which is what we're going to be talking about as a heads up. And the anatomy of an emotion looks something like this. Something happens, an activating event. It tends to be, we experience some sort of diversity. Then we develop a belief system about it. Siegelman? Yes. That's how it's pronounced. That's how I think it's pronounced. It may be slightly different. I might be off my pronunciations. So right, something happens, then we develop a belief system about it. And then a lot of times we tend to move forward in our lives based on the belief system that we've developed, which in some cases is fine and normal. But in a lot of cases, it tends to overgeneralize things. It might, we might be acting on a belief system that isn't based in reality. And for a lot of people, that can mean there's a lot of limitations to their life. I promised the ABCDE method, and D and E are right here. D is a disputation. So we say, hey, you know what? Maybe what's going on isn't fully based in reality. Maybe, something that happened that I've then generalized and made apply to my whole life really was just applicable to that one situation. And the idea for we dispute an irrational belief is that we get energized and empowered, and we're able to walk out of it and say, hey, maybe, maybe I don't need to see the world this way. And I think that if you're all sitting and saying, yeah, this seems kind of abstract, that didn't really help. We have some examples of kind of ideas that maybe people would have been running with, kind of negative ideas that maybe we had, ideas about how the world is. I think the world is this way. I think things are against me. Nobody likes me. That's a big one. I think what's interesting and the example that I tend to use, I'll go back up here just because it's a little bit easier to go through. I use the example of, something happening. So let's say, I'm in school and someone's having a party and I know they're having a party, and I don't get invited to it. my invitation never comes, and I sit and I say, oh man, what happened here? There was this party and I'd get invited and people don't like me. And I develop a belief system. Because I want to make sense of the world. People do this. It's not just me. It's everyone. We want the world to make sense. There needs to be a reason and a cause for everything. So I don't get invited to a party. I go over here to beliefs. I start getting these ideas about, people don't like me. I'm unpopular. I'm, throw in whatever insecurities apply. I know this is, I'm, I don't have the right, clothes. I'm not in the right socioeconomic class. I don't look the right way. I don't have the right body type, whatever it is. I've developed that there has to be some reason. There has to be something wrong with me, because generally our beliefs are like they come from our rational beliefs in these situations tend to come from our insecurities. And we move forward with those beliefs and we say, okay, well, these people just don't like me. I'm just going to keep to myself and I'm going to sit quietly and I'm not going to engage with them and I'm going to stay away because they don't like me and they don't want me around. And I'm going to run with this belief system kind of for a long time. I know that, in my own life, I let, kind of this type of irrational belief really make a lot of decisions for me for a long time. And it wasn't particularly helpful for me. And I'm glad I figured it out when I did. I went through, kind of an education system. I think when I was around 18 or 19, where this exact thing was brought up and laid out for me. And I kind of had this revelatory moment where I'm like, wow, I've been trying to make meaning out of all these situations in my life. And these situations, they're just situations. Things just happened. Because again, you come down to the dispute, in that situation. And so many situations are this way, I could have been invited to the party and maybe my invitation just got lost in the mail. Maybe, something strange happened, somebody's mom forgot to do something. They ran out of stamps and they meant to get an extra one and it fell between the seats in the car. There's all sorts of things that reasonable things that could have happened. But I made it about myself. It could, because it could never be that someone mistakenly dropped something and forgot, or someone made a mistake or an accident happened or, whatever it is. We just kind of always tend to make their belief system be about us, and it usually tends to center around our insecurities. But even so, even if I didn't get invited to something, it's not reasonable for me to then assume that just because I didn't get invited to one thing that everyone doesn't like me. But a lot of times that's kind of the way that the thought process goes. And until we're willing to dispute it and say, hey, you know what? I didn't get invited to this, and it doesn't necessarily mean anything. It doesn't have to mean anything. I don't have to make that be a meaning and be about me and be something that I need to pick up and carry with me and take along for the rest of my life. When I'm able to set down that belief system, which is usually pretty irrational, I walk away and I'm like, hey, you know what? I don't know why these things happened. They did, but I can't get, I'm not going to let that be what dictates the rest of my life. And it's where I end up having a lot of power, and I can walk away with it and say, wow, I feel really empowered in this situation. I can move forward. And I'm sure that everyone, you don't have to talk about it. It's not something, I'm not asking for everyone to get into it, but I'm sure that everyone can think of a situation where something happened. And a lot of times we've developed belief systems about it, and we may have let those belief systems run a good amount of our lives. And the good news is that you don't have to. A lot of times that those beliefs were just things that does I plead the fifth? Yeah, no, I mean, it's true. I did this in a lot of areas of my life for a long time. I don't think it's just the way that our brains work. Our brains say, hey, I need to make meaning out of the world. And what it comes down to is, we want the world to be safe and predictable. So we make meaning out of all the situations we come across. Corey, yeah, no, I mean, everyone has these. It's not uncommon at all. It's super common for us to have these. But what it comes down to is that we don't talk about it very often, because it's usually it means acknowledging an insecurity that we have. It means saying, hey, I don't feel good about this part of my life or this part of who I am or my personality, and and I want to be liked, and I want to be well received in my community, and by my friends, by my family. So we a lot of times we let these things be one of the guides in our lives, and it tends not to guide us into like a awesome empowered place. And they're worth disputing. That's really the whole point of it. You know, the idea, challenging absolutes is a big one. A lot of times we say, um, you know, I got bit by a dog one time, so dogs are all bad. Kind of things like that. And I'll say be cautious, especially around strange dogs. But I feel like a lot of times apply that type of a thought process to a lot of different things. And for this is unique for me. I dog was chasing you. I'm sorry to hear that. I work in as a hobby in rare fruit. I grow rare fruit trees, which is not a rabbit hole I can get too far down today. But I'll sit and talk with my friends, and they'll be like, "Oh, I had this fruit once, I didn't really like it." And I was like, "Well, if and I have a buddy who used to be like, well, you've only had it once, so the next one could be different. Not every think about apples. Not every apple tastes the same." And it's interesting because he's like, oh well, I tried it. Well, maybe it wasn't right. Maybe the growing conditions were bad. Maybe something was. You had one experience and you took that and applied that to everything about this one thing, and you kind of wrote off a whole area of life because you had one bad experience, or you had one experience that you didn't totally love. So challenging the absolutes, and kind of challenging the negative things. Optimism. I know it was in the readings. I know it's there. I know for a lot of people, it's not the place that we start from. A lot of times, it feels good to complain sometimes. I get that. I'm not gonna say it doesn't. But when we're able to challenge that and say, hey, you know what? Here's what's actually going on. When I complain, this is what happens. I think we get a lot more out of being optimistic. I know that's one of the things that changed in my life when I was starting to challenge pessimism, and I said, hey, you know what? I don't like feeling bad every day. I wonder what I can do to feel better every day. And for me, it meant having different inputs in my life. It meant, I listened to upbeat music instead of sad music, and I felt different every day. And, it's trial and error. It's a process. But it works. Or similar kind of ideas. The self-talk, the ideas, I never catch a break. This always happens to me. Nobody likes me. Very seldom are all those things actually true. I think a lot of times the situation that we're in overwhelms and sometimes feels insurmountable, and it's easy to think that it's the thing that runs the world. But usually as soon as that situation is resolved, it very seldom is on our mind anymore. When you have a flat tire, all you can think about is the flat tire, but 3 days later it's a distant memory, that you even had one. So I think, again, what's important in looking at these things and challenging these systems, to kind of go over the emotional process. What happens emotionally in a situation? Mindfulness is a big part of this, which is what we're going to talk about on the other end of this discussion. But to actually be able to stop and think about our emotions, when so-and-so said this is how I felt about it. Or when this happened, this is how it made me feel. When we have the opportunity to focus on our positive emotions and think about things that kind of guide us to a more positive headspace, I think that it's important to take those opportunities. And looking at things from a rational standpoint, the thing I was talking about earlier, if you don't get invited to a party, it's reasonable to assume that someone just forgot to do something, or it's reasonable to assume that, something got lost in the mail. Those things happen all the time. It's just a part of life. It's really easy to, sit and make a situation about ourselves, though. I've had some conversations with people recently, and um, again, the mind wants to make sense of things. It wants to say, hey, what's happening here? Why is this happening? How can I prevent this from happening again? How can I make the future more safe for myself? So on and so forth. So it's reasonable that we're going to have these thought processes. And here's another diagram that kind of goes through it. So, we go through an event, something happens. This self-talk hypothesis is kind of where a lot of times it gets a little bit hairy. Our emotions, usually some sort of hurt feelings. This one right here, the camera check is kind of the one. If somebody was watching from an outside perspective and they said, what happened, what actually physically transpired versus the subtext, the everything that we put onto that situation was actually happening from a completely objective point of view, tends to be a little bit different from what we think is happening. If someone was just watching a videotape of this, they would see these things. This is what transpired. But we tend to make up a story about it, especially if it's something that we don't fully understand. What's funny is that when we have a situation that we don't fully understand, we tend to just want to make up a situation, or we want to make up a scenario that has that what transpired makes sense. Very seldom do we just ask the person, "Hey, this happened. What's going on?" Hey, we had plans and you canceled them. And did you cancel them because, you don't like me, you don't want to hang out, or what's going on? And a lot of times it's just like, well, we cancel plans. Hey, I can't make it to this thing. That's the end of it. A lot of times maybe it's like, hey, I had a doctor's appointment that came up, or hey, I am violently ill and can't leave the bathroom, but didn't want to say that to you over a text message. There's a lot of things. Especially if it's one of those things for the other person, if they're embarrassed about the reason that something's happening, they might not talk about it. They might not volunteer that information, but it's kind of one of those things where I think it's reasonable to say, hey, this happened. And I think, I made it mean some stuff. What was there? So I think that it's important and worthwhile to dispute it, challenge it, clarify, figure out what's actually going on in a lot of situations. And we're able to walk away feeling kind of renewed. We say, hey, wow, I thought it meant this, and really it was this thing. I think that being able to stop and identify that and get to the bottom of it and figure out what's actually going on is very important. There are some kind of faulty thinking ideas that they're the creation of some of the instructors from the psychology of play department, but they really apply to kind of a lot of the negative mindsets that we find ourselves in. So if you find yourself in one of these, yes, plate spinner is on there. But I'll show you as we go through. We'll get to them all. It's the first one. Quarter to address or to explain, you can see from the image, someone who's got a lot of things going on. They're trying to get everything done and make everything look perfect, and they're spreading themselves very thin, to put it a different way. And they kind of have the idea of that they shouldn't make mistakes, that they should they want to be perfect at everything. They want to be good. They want to be doing enough. They want everyone to be happy with them. They tend not to set very good boundaries, all those things, because they want to be giving 100% in all these areas, and it's unrealistic to do. Anyone who, you're all here in school. Most of you have jobs. A lot of you have family obligations, other things like that you have to take care of. And if you have, other things that you need to do, it's reasonable that sometimes, someone is going to not get your full attention. I get enough late assignments that explain, hey, sorry, I didn't get my assignment turned in on time because I had a family thing come up, or I had a work thing come up, or, something else is going on in my life. And right, we tend to have these kind of, the mental consequence of that is unfortunate. It ends up putting us in this place where we feel, we feel worthless. We're like, oh, I can't do anything right, and it's like, well, that's not the case. The case is that you're trying to do a lot of different things. You're trying to do them all 100%. It's unrealistic to think that you're going to be able to be successful at, 20 different things 100% of the time. But again, it's for a lot of people, it's really hard to see that in themselves. It's hard to say, oh, wow, I am really spread pretty thin. There's an acknowledgement that should happen in those situations. Maybe I should give myself a little more time, or maybe I should, prune some of these things until I have more time to dedicate to them. For all of you, something is going to take a hit while you're in school. You're giving up a good amount of time each week to do school. For some people, that's going to be like, oh, well, I don't have as much leisure time. I don't get to, read books or play video games as much. I don't get to go to the gym as often. I don't get to, cook as many meals as I'd like. Whatever it is, but acknowledge, that you can't give it all. I'm sorry. I don't know if anyone watches Parks and Rec, but there's a Ron Swanson quote, and you're gonna have to forgive my language, but he says never half-ass two things. He says whole-ass one thing, which is what I'm reminded of. But it's one of those things where you can't give yourself fully to that many things. Something's gonna suffer. So just kind of keep that in mind moving forward. I'm glad people enjoyed that one. It's one of my favorite things from him. I really enjoy it. So the next one is the damsel in distress, and this applies just as much to men as it does to women. Please don't think that this is a women only or a sexist thing. It's not the case. I think it's just an easy imagery to take and to use. Sean, I'm glad you made it. So right, kind of and I'm sure everyone knows someone like this who perpetually needs to be saved, who maybe is putting themselves in situations that they're immediately underwater on a situation. I think that a lot of times, I feel like very seldom do the people who come to the go-to trainings, who are like, I'm carved out time in the middle of my day to do this, usually are the people who are doing the best in the class. So I think that the group that I have, in front of me is that group. But right, everyone I'm sure knows someone who, whatever it is, someone knows someone who, right, they're just, they're always, hey, I can't do this, I can't handle it. And sometimes it's a mindset, and sometimes it's a, people take on too much. It cuts both ways. The mindset, I think, is what's really challenging. People are going to take on a lot of stuff one way or the other. It always happens. But right, we tend to get these ideas, oh, I can't do this one thing, or I'm so accustomed to, this situation that, if it changed, I wouldn't know what to do, and it causes a lot of anxiety. For me, I'll give you an example from my own life where it's to a lesser degree, but it still was a thing. I went from, being in one situation where I was like, okay, cool. I lived in this place. It was pretty cheap to live there. And I didn't really like it there. But it was cheap. And I was like, I was talking with my wife, and she said, well, we should buy a house. And, I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to go from spending this much money for, living each month to more money than that. And I'm like, well, where's that money going to come from? And I remember having all this anxiety about it. and until I just got to a point where it's just like, you know what, I can find where that money in our budget, and like we just can move things around. Maybe I'll eat out less, whatever it is, and we're fine. There's nothing, but I kind of said, oh, I don't know what to do. I can't handle the situation. How am I going to do this? Um, yeah, so but it was mental. It was mental for me. Um, in reality, dollars and cents, money was there. But I said, hey, I'm used to a little bit more security and flexibility and blah blah blah, and I'm worried I won't have that. And I think it's important, to not jump into a situation financially that's going to have you totally underwater. And again, we made decisions that were like, okay, we bought a really modest house. There's nothing particularly extravagant. But yeah, it's very easy to fall into a situation where we think that we won't be able to do things on our own. I'm sure everyone has met someone like this, inevitably, moving out of home, moving out of the house, like out of our parents' house, can be this way for a lot of people. Inevitably there's an 18-year-old who is moving out who doesn't know how to do laundry, and they're finally moved out on their own, and they end up with this huge pile of laundry because they refuse to do it, and then they just have to figure it out one day, and it's probably a little bit painful, but eventually they get around to it. Some people carry this trait longer in life than others. Some people are always able to find someone who can, do something for them, get them out of a situation. And some people adapt and overcome it. It doesn't tend to serve people very well. So keep that in mind as you move forward. If you can identify with it at all, there's, it's one of those things that, there's probably been, enough situations in life that have kind of reinforced this or said, hey, it's you can't do these things, whatever. But right, it's faulty thinking at the end of the day. And it's probably realistic that, you don't need to be saved from situations, and you can probably handle a lot of situations on your own. And then the next one is The Wizard of Oz. It's where people kind of just assume that the world exists for their benefit. Things should be the way I want them to be. People should do what I want them to do. Why doesn't anyone do what I want them to do? So on and so forth. Where we and sure, of course, everyone would prefer the world to just be the way you want it to be. Yeah, or you get mad and say, "Oh, well, if these people don't do what I want, then they should all pay for it." It's easy to fall into, but right, everyone rolls through life, usually looking out for themselves. Then you get parents who are like, "Yeah, I'm looking out for my kids," but then I'm immediately also just looking after myself. That's how most of the world is. Most of us are just trying to get through day to day, and some people will happily help you when they can, but right, a lot of times people are just going to be going through the world looking out for themselves, and the things that they do are probably going to be based off of that. So it's it's not reasonable to think that people are just going to say, hey, how do you think things ought to be done all the time? Unless you're the boss and you run the company or something like that. But otherwise, they're probably just going to say, hey, this is how I think things should go. And, we don't have to compete with them. We don't have to get angry with them. We don't have to do that. But we say, hey, well, these are how I think things should go. This is my understanding and impressions and perspective on things, and share that and collaborate with people. Rick says that's why you shake them and yell at them all the time to listen. That's how the military is. I don't have any military experience. I thank you for your service. But I've heard similar things. Yeah, when you said you got shook up and it didn't help. Yeah, I believe that. I think that in the conflict resolution styles, you have the very competitive styles where people just want to exert themselves and have the world be the way they want it. Yeah, I don't. It's not a way. It's not a way to keep people happy and settle down, and I don't think it's a good long-term solution. So, um, we've got the albatross, the idea that things will never work out. Again, there's a lot of the should stories. It should have gone this way, or should have gone that way, or if only this had happened. Um, people who don't want to try, they say, this won't work out. I'm just never going to try. I'm, kind of write things off. Wait, that was me in my 30s. Even, yeah, in your 20s. Yeah. Sure. I think it's really easy to get a bad taste in our mouths from doing something. And it's interesting because you think, when you fail at something, hopefully you've learned something from the process, and you fail enough times and eventually you become an expert. That's how you become an expert, by failing a lot. Ask any expert in almost any industry, and they're probably going to say, yeah, I really messed this up a lot. It didn't go well a bunch of times before it finally went well. Um, Again, I far too often relate things back to my garden experience and fruit trees. But yeah, I can't tell you. People are like, man, you're really good at keeping fruit trees alive. And I'm like, I can't tell you how many fruit trees I've killed. We can literally just have no idea. Tons of them. Um, I was just like, yeah, I've ruined a lot of things before I got it right. And that's how people learn. It takes time. Everything takes a lot of time. There's yeah, tree murderer exactly. It's the 10,000 hour rule or idea. That it takes 10,000 hours of something to become an expert at it. And right, I mean, I think this is like a really important acknowledgement. I'll talk to people from time to time. They'll say, oh. This happens to me all the time. My brother is he's a really good musician. He's good at a lot of things, but he plays guitar and plays piano really well. And I'm always like, man, that's awesome. Like I wish I could play guitar or piano that well. And then I'm like, you know what? I'm not willing to be bad at guitar and piano for as long as I think it will take to get kind of good. Like I'm just like being bad at it for that long it's like I just don't want to have to go through all that. So I just stopped saying I want to play guitar. I'm like, I would like it if I didn't have to try very hard and it just came naturally to me, but that's not the reality of that situation. It's anything that, you get good at. Usually it takes a while of being bad at it first. So if you jump into your first class, that's, whatever program you're in computer animation or you're in music production or you're in something, and your first project doesn't come out the way you expect it to or the way that you wish it did, don't worry. You're in the right place. That's what happens. It's going to be bad for a while before it gets good. Anything I think that you really care about or is worth doing, you're gonna be bad at. I really like watching skate videos. And I found some pretty good ones where people will just show all the crashes that a skateboarder has before they land their trick. And it's kind of brutal because they'll be like, oh, I'm jumping this big staircase. Like I'm jumping down like a flight of stairs on a skateboard, and they eat it just so many times before they get it right. And I'm like, oh gosh, I would have stopped after one or two times. And these people, 5, 6, 10, 20 times, and then eventually they get it and they're real excited. But I'm like, oh, I can't imagine how brutal that must have been. Watch it getting to the point where it happened. Yeah, Patrick says nothing good comes easy. That's what I've learned in life. I tend to agree. If you haven't failed a lot in life, push yourself harder. Look for new ways to push yourself and to try. Because right, if it's easy to do, and if it's not hard, and you're not having to, if you're not failing, you're probably not learning. That's not entirely true. There's ways to learn without failing, but I think I think after the examples, everyone kind of gets the idea. Right. It takes hard work. Absolutely. A lot of times, this is one of those things that people. Sorry, I'm reading the comments. Patrick says good things are worth fighting for. I agree. It's not really true reward if it's easy. Yeah, it's not a true reward. Yeah, absolutely. Um, the labels though. This is one of those ones that they're just bad. And I every now and then, um, I think often people would like a set of labels, and they say, hey, here's how I would describe myself. I think these things are applicable about me. But then there's exceptions to those rules, and they say, oh well, I'm this way except for on this occasion, or I'm this except for these situations. I think that overall, trying to label people, even self labels, are really tough. It's really easy to pick up a label at some point in your life and say, well, I feel this way about this situation, so I think this label is appropriate. And we might carry that and hold on to that. And we get years down the road and we say, I've hold on to this thing, but I don't actually believe the stuff that made me want to pick this label up. Why am I still holding it? Why am I still acting this way? Why am I still doing this thing? Why is this something that, is still a part of me? And I think that it's important to give yourself a fresh chance every day. Give the people around you fresh chances. New people are new. Let them express that. I think it's really easy to look at someone and say, oh, you're just like this other person I know. You must be this way, or be this type of person. I'm sure, I've had situations where, maybe, someone said, oh, I'm really into this thing or this type of music, and that person for something unrelated to their taste in music got under my skin, or things didn't go well between us, and I said, oh, everyone who listens to that type of music must be awful, or whatever it was, and I would apply that kind of in this way that was really unfair. And it wasn't until looking at it years later and said, oh, wow, I've kind of held these ideas and beliefs about, this group of people because of this one person, this one exchange I had with this person. Maybe I should give the rest of the world a chance because they're different people. Yeah, let people be different. Exactly. Don't assume because they like one thing or are a certain way that they're going to be a certain way. I think this is really easy to do with but people you're in a relationship with. If you have a significant other, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever it is, oh, this girl likes, that was exactly my situation. It was like this girl who's like, oh, I really like, this music, or whatever. I was like, oh, I don't like that because things didn't work out in that relationship. And again, it's like it's like, oh, you hold on to these things and you realize, it's like, oh, my ego got hurt, and I wanted to make sense of that because my ego got hurt. So I need to make sense of the world and say it's about this one thing instead of about me and my interpersonal relationship with someone. So be cautious of the labels that you use. The idea of should, as this as a thing. I should do this, or others should do this. We really tend to worry a lot. I think the idea of should in the past, outside of a very quick, hey, should have done this. Now I know for the future. Outside of that, really that much of an exchange, it's really not productive to look at the past and say, oh, I wish I would have done this differently. I wish I, hadn't have done this, or whatever it is. Right. It just really adds to guilt and depression. makes us feel bad about the way things transpired in life, and there's nothing we can do about it. And if there is something we can do about it, do it, change it, make it different, and move on. But don't hold on to those things. It's not doing you any good. Put them to bed and move on. Similarly with the future, you know, um, you can't live in too far in the future. It's reasonable to say, hey, here's what I'd like to do. Here's what I'd like to get accomplished. These are some of my goals moving forward. But right, the reality is that we are here right now and today. This is where we have power. This is where we have to live. I can sit and think about the future. I can say, oh well, in the future I want to do this thing and this thing and this thing. Um, but right, all we have is right here, right now. Not to totally bring it to that, but it's important to make some plans, think about the future, think about what we want to do. But if we're living our whole life in some future scenario, we're probably missing out on what's going on around us. So keep that in mind. Take it for what you will. Um, if you find yourself living in this alternate future reality that you're not paving the path for, maybe it's time to stop and say, hey, is that a future that is the future I'm imagining the future that I'm paving the path for? And if it's not, then maybe we need to start altering our expectations of the future and thinking about what reality is going to look like for us. So just think about that as you move forward. It's because it's fun. Everyone wants to, think about, oh, when I'm, further along my career and here's what I'll have. But a lot of times, at least for me, I like to daydream and say, oh, if I won the lottery, now I'd do this and this and this thing. And I'll sit and I'll daydream about that for a while, and it's a fun daydream to have. But I can't exist in that reality because it's pretty unlikely to manifest, given the unlikelihood of winning the lottery. So make sure that the future you're envisioning for yourself and planning for is based in reality. So we have mindfulness. I'm going to take this opportunity to play a quick video. If you go into the materials section, there is a little tab and it says mindfulness. If you click on that video, we'll watch that video. We'll come back in a couple of minutes and we'll keep going from there. Alrighty, thanks for coming back from that. I guess a fun video. It kind of gives you a quick little blurb into mindfulness and what that looks like. But right, it gives you an idea of what that looks like in the immediacy. Kind of the very first, the first indication of the first indication of right, kind of what a world in which mindfulness plays a role can look like. It's super helpful. I think it's really interesting in a lot of situations to just stop and think and pause. I think far too interesting. It's interesting to stop in conversation and pause and give yourself some time. Far too often we're concerned about the way that other people are going to view us or how we look. We think we have to have a rehearsed, thing to say to people. And in the reality, so much of our life is a conversation. Yeah. So stop and reset, Wayne. Yeah, absolutely. That's it. A lot of times we'll we think, oh, I've had this before, where I'm, having a class and I'm talking with people and I'll lose my train of thought, or I'll get off track, and I'm like, oh no, everyone will think I'm stupid if I don't have my speech perfectly aligned. But in reality, I have, I've gone through lectures with scripts before, and it is painfully boring for me to read from a script. It's just not. I'm glad you got your audio fixed. By the way, I saw your note. It's not fun for me to do that, and I don't think people have the same experience. Having a conversation with people is I think is where education happens. When you can talk to me and I can talk back to you and we can ask questions. You can all watch a video online if you want to see someone read from a script. And some people it works really well, and if that works well, then great. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just, for me, that's not my teaching style and not how I want to interact with people. I think that having an organic conversation is what's going to resonate with people. It's how I would rather communicate and what I'd prefer to do. So it works out well for me. Right. Mindfulness really is, it's about taking time to be in the moment, to sit and say, okay, what's actually happening? What's going on? Self-reflection statements. Right now, I feel this way. I'm observing these things around me. This is what's happening. Here's how I feel about that. And right, it's tough. A lot of times we sit and we think, oh well, what am I going to do? After this, am I going to go eat? Do I have to get back to work? Do I have to go make food for my kids? Do I have to go do this other thing? But just kind of stopping and being in the moment and appreciating it. Again, kind of reeling it back in from what does the future look like to it's like, hey, what's actually happening here around me? I think that it's a little bit tougher in an online conversation than it is in person. In person, people are pretty aware of it when you're not paying attention to their conversation. They say, hey, you seem like you spaced out a little bit. But right, developing a deeper awareness of what's actually going on around you. I think it's worth looking into. It's worth doing. I'd encourage everyone to kind of look into mindfulness meditation practices. If it's something that you think will work in your life. I think that for all of us, it's something that can work in our lives. It's something that, doesn't mean, I think meditation is one of those things that from the outside is like, well, I don't know how to do it, or, I don't have, time, or I'm not, I don't know what that looks like, or I don't have a meditation room in my house, whatever it is. And I think the reality is that, 10 minutes a day is probably enough for most people to get, a reasonable result from that. So if it's something that's interesting to you, that video has other links attached to it. If you want to go watch some of those other videos afterwards, it'd be a good jumping off point. So again, kind of looking at what works and what doesn't. Practicing mindfulness tends to help people to avoid multitasking, which I think we went through it at the beginning of the month. It's tempting. Very often we feel like we want to do a lot of things, and I think that for most people it doesn't work out very well. We don't get quite the results that we want. We end up feeling very busy and getting very little done. It helps us with our awareness of emotions, which I think is important. A lot of times people, are just like, I don't like the way that I feel, or I feel bad right now. But what does that actually look like? What does that actually mean? More often than not, I think that it will come down to something that is a physical or emotional need going unmet. I want to feel cared about. I want to feel loved. I want to feel protected. I want to feel secure in my position. One of those things that is we perceive a threat to one of those things in our lives. And when we're able to break it down in that way, it's a lot easier to be reasonable and rational about how we deal with that. Otherwise, we're just like, I'm mad, and we don't know why. I'm mad at you, but far too often, right? We're not entirely sure what it is. If you don't believe me, just think back to high school. People fight about everything, and a lot of times it has something to do with, I'm worried about, not having, I'm worried that my girlfriend will get stolen, so I'll fight all the guys, or I'm worried that, this person will, do something or not do something that I want or don't want them to do, and how can I get them to be the way that I want them to be? And the reality is that we can't, but we tend to just act weird, get a little nutty sometimes. It doesn't serve us very well. Practicing mindfulness and kind of being based in reality becomes a habit. We do it long enough, we say, hey, this feels a lot more like this than it does anything else. When I'm able to identify how I feel in a situation, I can say, hey, this is bringing this up for me. I can do this with my wife and I do on a fairly regular basis. Say, hey, this feels like, this thing is going on. Is this what's going on right now? Like, am I reading the situation correctly? And it's nice to be able to just be like, yep, that's what's going on. Cool. Like I know, and I can act accordingly now. But it takes practice. That's kind of the last part of it. It's knowing it and putting it into practice are two separate things. It's awesome to know it. It's very important. It's definitely worth looking into, but we have to put it into use. It's a little bit awkward at first, maybe for some of us, we say, hey, is this what's going on here? Hey, I'm being more aware of my emotions. But I think it really does pay off in the long run. Before we get into the golden circle, I don't have a great slide made up for this, but I do want to talk briefly about stress. I have one more video. It's in the materials section. We're going to watch it. It says stress in the brain. I'm going to click on it, and then I'm going to discuss it a little bit with you. Alrighty, I think everybody's probably coming back from that right about now. I really like that video. I think it does a really good job explaining why stress is something that we should deal with. I think a lot of times there's a lot of big words. Yeah, I think the visuals kind of help out with it. You can go, you can probably dig in a little bit deeper if you want a better understanding of it. But right, the idea that I think a lot of times we think, oh, stress. Well, it's part of life, and you see the Wall Street banker pulling out his hair, kind of a thing. You're like, oh, well, that's business. Whatever the story that we're telling ourselves about it is. We think it's this thing that just like we just push through and we have to, just power through it. Everyone gets stressed out. And it's true that everyone gets stressed out, but there's some serious ways to deal with it. And a lot of times, I think it's important to say, hey, you know what, is the stress that I'm experiencing, is the, I'm going to experience levels of stress. Is the stress that I'm experiencing proportionate to, the reward that I'm receiving or whatever it is? And it's probably not, in reality, which is why I think for a lot of people, they just have to take, take a step back and say, hey, you know what, I might be taking this a little bit too seriously. It's important to try hard. It's important to do your best. But at a certain point, it's just like, hey, you know what? I'm taking a step back. I think I've gotten a little too serious about this, and maybe I need to relax a little bit. Maybe I need to think about other things for a while. With that being said, oh, Charles says, I think my frontal cortex is gone. I think it's probably still there, but yeah, it's you absolutely can do. You can kind of really wear out parts of your brain. So make time for the things that work against that. I know it seems counterintuitive. I have this conversation with my wife a lot. I say, we talk about self-care and making sure we're prioritizing taking care of ourselves. And when my wife has time, to get to the gym, to work out, to do the things that she feels good about doing, she is a lot happier and better at home, better with our kids. She's a happier person when she's taking care of herself. And sometimes it's hard for her to say, hey, I need to get out and take care of myself. And what I've realized is, I'm like, she's a person I would much rather spend time with when she's taking care of herself and she's doing things that are good for her. So I'm happy to help her prioritize that. And I think it's important that we know that about ourselves. Hey, these are the things that I feel better when I do. How am I going to make sure I get these to the time to do these things so that I can feel good? Patrick says, how about sleep? If you enjoy sleeping and feel really relaxed after a nap, or the idea of sleeping in, if that works out for you, then yeah, by all means. There's not an answer that's good for everyone necessarily. I really like exercise. I like to run. I like to have the time to kind of like process through my week and think about things. So I run, and I really like it. It's weird. I hated it when I started. I don't have a good, I can't tell you when it changed, but at some point it changed. But I feel much better when I exercise than when I don't. Similarly with, keeping my garden, I keep a lot of plants. I really enjoy that. It brings me, a lot of clarity, and I feel better when I'm spend time with my plants. So, I would recommend it. Whatever works for you, though. If you find you're refreshed after taking a nap, take a nap by all means. Set an alarm for yourself so you don't sleep in too late. Charles, the reverse for me. Taking her points is nice. They're great listeners. Yeah. Find the things that work out though. Whatever it is, what works for you is what's important. It's not everyone will want the same things or will get the same benefit out of the same inputs. So maybe a little bit of trial and error in figuring that out. I think everyone's probably seen the golden circle. It's come up. I know it comes up in creative presentations, so I think everyone's probably come across it at some point. I like to go through it just because it is interesting, and I think that when we're looking at mindfulness and we're looking at stress and we're looking at why it is that we're doing the things that we do, it's important to remember why, because so often we find ourselves in these situations where maybe we're overworked and we're undercompensated or whatever it is, and we say, why am I even doing this anymore? I think it's really important to remember that. Remember why it is that we're doing what we're doing. Like, I really love seeing people's lives get transformed. I like seeing people accomplish their goals. It is very, very rewarding for me to see people, even over the course of the month that they're here with me, go from, relatively new in college to, kind of a little bit more prepared for the rest of their journey. And I'm like, oh, wow, I helped these people get prepared for their journey. Maybe you didn't take everything away from the class. Maybe you took some things. Maybe you took, hopefully, some of it. Hopefully not none. But I really like seeing people walk away and say, oh, wow, I enjoyed this class. I got a lot out of it. I think that the tools that I picked up in here are going to serve me well in the future. And it's why I do this. I really like it. I like seeing people at the end of the month say, hey, I think I'm better prepared for the rest of college than I was at the beginning of this class. I've got some real world tools for, dealing with not just things for school, but for the rest of my life. The thing about the anatomy of an emotion, the way that we think about things, that applies to so many areas. That applies to everything in our lives. And if we're able to apply that stuff, it's like, wow, we're really going to be ahead of the game. And probably going to be ahead of a lot of our peer group. A lot of people who maybe haven't had the same education, they haven't been afforded the same information. So it's interesting. Charles, best of luck if you go skydiving. I saw your comment. That'd be cool. So right, start with the why, move on to the other parts of it. Keep what your why is, what's driving you, close at hand, and remember it. Does anyone have any questions about anything that we talked about at all today? If you do, I'd be happy to answer them. If you don't, you're free to go. I realize we had a shorter. I realize we had a shorter session today. I hope nobody is terribly offended by it. But I thought, I can go through this and not take the break and be able to get done a little bit early. How was my day? My day is pretty good. Hung out with my kids this morning. Took care of some fruit trees. Yeah, good. How's your day going? It's been fun so far. Cool. Awesome. I keep a lot of small fruit trees and bushes from South America. The trees that I have the most of are a tree called Jaboticaba. That's how you spell it, in case you're wondering what it looks like. You can go Google it. I keep a ton of those, a bunch of different varieties. It's from Brazil. It's their national fruit. It's delicious. It's like a thick-skinned grape. It's kind of how I would describe it. That's like the easiest way to describe it. So it's got a thick skin. It's kind of, you throw the whole fruit in your mouth. It's about the size of a grape. But it's circular. It's a marble shape. You throw the whole thing in your mouth and you kind of pop it. It pops kind of like a water balloon, and the skin stays together, and then the middle comes out, and it's kind of like what they call a melted pulp. So it's not a solid pulp, but it's pretty tasty. I like it a lot. Let's see. Other people are asking questions. Oh, have you heard of those grades that are 3,000? They are huge. I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that. Grapes that are huge. Yeah, I don't know. Can I explain the final just a bit? Yeah, everything is the same as it's been week over week. There's not. Oh, I do know these grapes you're talking about. Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, from Japan. What's interesting? I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about the class, and then I'll talk to you about these grapes. I'm sorry. I just want to finish addressing the question. Um, the rest of the class is the same as it's been week over week. There's a weekly quiz, discussion board, turn in your schedule tonight, your weekly plan. Everything is exactly the same. There's a reflection. There's a final week 4 reflection. Oh, there's also you do your second E3 assignment tonight. So make sure you do your second E3 assessment. But yeah, everything is the same. There's not like a cumulative final or anything. If that was where we were going with that question. Um, yeah, no problem. Happy to answer. Um, I'll happily answer any other questions you have. Back to the grape talk, though. um, it's interesting. Yeah, these grapes, and there's a bunch of fruits that they sell in Japan that are gift giving fruits. So they sell regular fruit as well. Basically, they grow these to be perfect fruits, kind of aesthetically. They want them to be very beautiful and kind of have like really high sugar content. So a lot of times they'll limit the amount of fruit they allow the plant to produce. So they'll just prune back a lot of what the plant is trying to produce. Um, yeah, it's interesting. There's a company that like there's a store that sells them. There's a few stores in Japan where they sell them. Um, but it's all gift culture. It's like they're big elaborate gifts. People eat them, but they're not. The square watermelons are interesting. They just grow them in boxes, but they're almost all rind. It's almost all watermelon rind. They just look cool. Um, oh, you were stationed in Japan. That's pretty interesting. Um, yeah, they have a lot of really interesting fruit practices over there. Um, but yeah, no, it's definitely interesting. Um, yeah, they have. I'm trying to think. They grow a lot of different fruits inside molds. So they have pears that are in the shape of a Buddha. But again, you put a mold around the pear when it's growing on the tree, and they take the shape of the mold that they're in. I think there's like other fruits that are in the shape of hearts. Similarly, you just grow them in a mold, and they take the shape of it. So it's pretty interesting, though. Oh yeah, if you live in Hawaii, yeah, lychee is delicious. I really like it. Hmm. Japan has released a crayon game app that you can actually win stuff, but that's new. I'm not sure I'm familiar. Oh, a crane game. Ooh, I do like crane games. They are rigged. I've done yeah, they're rigged, but I love crane games. They are super fun. Yeah, I like them more than is reasonable for an adult. But yeah, I'm with you. Crane games are excellent. You can win stuff and they send it to you. Interesting. You have piqued my interest. Now I'm gonna go look it up on the internet. Interesting. I think I found it online. Yep, I found it. Same one. Cool. Well, maybe I will download this app and I will play some crane game. Thank you for that. That is a interesting. This is going to be an interesting way to spend some time. That's cool. Nice. Cool. Yeah, I'll check this out. Thank you. All right. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Yeah, thanks for being here. It was great having you all. I really appreciate having a class that's interactive. It's always really fun for me.